Hi, I'm Elizabeth Cornwell.
And I'm Rob Penzak. Welcome to Road to Reason, a secular guide to the 21st century. Please check us out on our Facebook page and on YouTube. Let us know what things you'd like to hear about. Elizabeth, you've been involved in the atheist movement for quite a long time, traveled around the world and around the country, speaking with a lot of young people and older ones. What have you seen as some of the biggest challenges that atheists face?
Well, most recently, I have been at several universities and having the opportunity to speak with young people. And I was quite surprised, actually, of how many of the young people were talking about how they have been shunned by their families when they told them that they had become non-believers. And while I am quite aware of that this does happen, I was surprised at the number of bright young students who raised their hand when we asked the question, how many of you have had problems with your families because they know that you're an atheist? And more than half of the students in the various classrooms we were visiting raised their hand.
That's amazing. That's really scary. I would have no idea that it was anything like that proportion. Yeah. I was hoping that since the numbers of atheists among the young are rising, they'd have enough friends and stuff, it wouldn't be an issue anymore, but that doesn't address the main subject there?
No, I mean, most of them have friends who are like them. They're in biology classes and other science classes, and it's easy at universities or with your job to find like-minded people, and that's terrific. You can usually find friends that think like you, especially in a large metropolis. However, we're talking about families. Families are not friends. Family are survival units. Human beings rely on family to survive. And it may not seem as apparent today in our modern world, but really, without family, we don't do very well. When you think about just, say, when you were 16, 17, about to start on your college career and into medical school, if all of a sudden you had completely been cut off from your family, financially and emotionally, do you think that you would have been able to gone on to university and gone on to medical school?
No, I can't really even put myself in that position very well. I was very interested in school, I guess, compared to all of my peers. Nonetheless, I had no clue, and if my parents, and mom especially, didn't take such an active role in, you have to think about college, here's the ones who got to go through this, I just wanted to go play ball or do whatever it was, at 16 or 17 and 18 years old. So no, if you lost that family support, there's no way I would have, ended up in something, going on toward more education and ending up, learning stuff.
And we know from psychological studies that family support, especially the support from parents and encouragement from parents, makes a huge difference on how well a person adjusts psychologically and how well they're able to face difficult times. Most of us, whether or not, family, I always say, families put the fun in dysfunctional, because we all have our issues with parents and siblings and so on, and that's never going to change. But there's still, for most people, that basic, the basic attitude of, I can really depend on my family when times are hard, and my family will be there to support me even when things are really bad. And there's that emotional support, even just knowing that, without actually going back and talking to your family about it, is enough to help people get through, to know that they always have that support.
And I think for me, leaving medicine, knowing that support was there, from going to a doctor to an unemployed writer, your ego sort of would take the stock, and without knowing that your family can be behind you,
right.
Again, it would have been a very difficult thing to do. And if I did do that, and everybody's reaction was, "You're doing what? Forget it. We don't want any more to do to you. We paid for all this college, all this med school.
Exactly.
Go do something. Find somebody else for your parents." It would have just destroyed my whole self-ego and how to
right.
go through life like
right.
that. And you're saying these are a lot of kids dealing with this also.
Well, and not just kids, but adults. But I want to focus a little bit on these young people. At the Richard Dawkins Foundation, at our website, when we first started our website, one of the things that people emailed us about a lot was saying, oh gosh, I never knew there were so many people out in the world like me, who thought like me, who didn't believe that there was a supernatural being, and who thought that being skeptical and being reasonable was the way to approach life. And we started getting letters too from people who would say things like, I've told my family, and they won't speak to me now. They won't allow me back in the house. And on our website we have discussion groups, and people can come in and write, and these discussion threads go on, and we try to encourage people to talk to one another about these things. And we also make people aware that there are local groups who they can go to. If they're not a student, I mean, obviously if they're a student, there's many atheist student groups. There's the Center for Inquiry student groups and the Secular Student Alliance groups that are there to at least create a friendship support. But for other people who are not students, for young people who are not students, we would encourage them to go and find perhaps a local group. But
is there any kind of outreach to the parents? Because obviously the parents aren't trying to be mean and nasty, but you can't exactly blame the child for realizing this religion doesn't work for me. I need to find a more logical way through life. Is there any attempt to reach out to the parents and say, if you disown your kids, you're truncating a lot of stuff in your own life and them. You need to find a way to reconnect, or is it really still all upon the young people?
It really is all upon the young person. There is no social network to really, truly address this issue. And unfortunately, even for those people young people who can afford to go to a therapist or a psychologist, all too often the therapists and psychologists are religious themselves, and they have a difficult time of helping these young people cope with the issue. And they may be good at helping someone cope with death, but not cope with being basically told, you no longer are a member of this family. And to lose everything, to not be able to go home for the holidays, to not be able to be in contact with your siblings who you grew up with, it's like having your entire world cut off from you. And I can't imagine anything as terrible as that.
And it's a very vulnerable time. Also, like you're going away from home maybe for the first time for college, and you desperately need that solid base, and then to be cut off at that time is terrible. And in terms of psychologists or different providers not being able to or willing to identify, I mean that really is a big problem, and maybe a reason that scientists across the board need to speak out. Instead of being quiet atheists, suddenly if a third of all the professionals came out and said, we're humanists, we're trying to make this a better world, but we don't believe in these various orthodox interpretations, it would create a much more open atmosphere, and there'd suddenly be a wealth of people that understood this and could relate to all the young people coming out. And I mean, you've probably talked about getting to a critical mass before, but I certainly understand that need for a huge bulk of people to come out and admit proudly, we're atheists.
We're atheists, yeah. And one of the things that we did in response as this was going on was to create what we called the OUT campaign. And the OUT campaign, when I came up with the idea of it, I was living in Colorado at a time when the gay community had a Born Different campaign, where they had this cute little dog that didn't bark, it mooed. And the little slogan was, Born Different, to try to get across the fact that the puppy's still cute, and just because it moos doesn't mean it's an awful, horrible creature. And the campaign actually did get a lot of very good press, and it does help with that idea of gay people are just like the rest of us. And research does show that people who know a gay person, gay or lesbian, and have met them are far more tolerant of homosexuality than people who don't think they have ever met a gay person. And gay people have come out. Well, most people have met atheists. And let me back up for just a minute. One of the funny comments I often hear is, wow, you're the first atheist I ever met. And the response really should be, no, you're not. I'm just the first atheist that actually admitted to being an atheist.
Right, if you do that, your librarians and your doctors and your teachers and all these people,
all these other
a lot
people
of them
are atheists as well. So the OUT campaign, which is on our website, or if you Google OUT campaign, you'll come up to it. The whole idea of that was not to out people as atheists, not to make a list, oh my gosh, this person's an atheist, but it was to those people who can come out without fear or have the courage to come out, to really come out, wear your little A emblem. Let people know you're an atheist. I mean, not necessarily shove it into people's faces, but just in a nice way. If somebody asks you what church you're going to or what synagogue, you just say, oh, I don't. I'm an atheist, and I spend my Sundays playing golf or playing with the kids. I don't go to church. Doing that is a great way to help people understand that in fact atheists are normal, usual, everyday people that they probably are meeting all the time. And to sort of mimic what the gay campaign had done, which was let people know that there are homosexuals out there and that they're fine. They're probably your uncle or your cousin or the neighbor down the street, and the florist, the butcher, whoever.
Right, it goes across the whole society.
Right.
In my own experience, I've never really had a lot of nasty pushback from just saying, I'm an atheist. But when you start to engage somebody in a little more critical thinking, if they say something about, this child died, but they're with Christ now, that's not the time maybe to come out and say, no, I'm an atheist, they don't, whatever. But there's lots of less, more subtle situations where you can either let something that somebody says, just let it float, or you can challenge it a little bit. And I think the problem for me is that I haven't figured out any possible way to sort of challenge somebody's religion and say gently, maybe for the last 30 years you've been living according to a fairy tale. Maybe you're teaching your kids bad things that are going to harm them in the future. You should look at it this way. There's not a nice way to say that. Right. So I don't sort of know how you get across that gap to people that are devoted believers. Does it mean that so they say something that you don't agree with for scientific or for just reason, for good reasons, do you just let it go? When do you kind of try to...
I think that's always a difficult situation. I mean, obviously, if you're, you don't want to tell someone who just lost a child, as you said, well, that's all just bunk. I mean, that's inappropriate. Letting people know that you're an atheist in just normal everyday life is a way to start bridging that gap. And maybe they come to you and ask you, well, how do you cope with these things, being an atheist? And
I actually had a friend very recently who, their religion isn't exactly mainstream, and they were saying how they've had problems. People hear their religion and they get a little ostracized too. And that one of the reasons that one of these people wanted to stay in the religion for a long time was they weren't sure that they would still be moral they weren't responsible enough or weren't solid enough. And they're a very solid person, they're very nice, they take good care of their kids. And we did have a very open discussion, there was no nastiness about, and they still believe in their religion, but it's like, from my perspective, you're a nice guy and take care of your kids. Has nothing to do with your religion. If you got rid of that, you'd still be the same person. And so it's funny how just as the atheist and a not mainstream religion, we had something to connect over and talk about.
Right, because both having that the idea that what it's like to be ostracized or shunned or questioned about your own morality because you're unique. And hopefully, though, we're becoming less and less unique, right?
Right,
we're growing.
But I haven't had those problems with the just being unique. It's much more when you not exactly push the agenda, but when you want them to listen to it and think about it a little more seriously. I don't seem to run into people that have a problem with me being an atheist as long as that's what I am.
Right.
And they don't want the proselytizing, I guess.
Right, right. And atheists don't generally proselytize so much. I mean, maybe there are some that do. It probably happens more among students. Young people is where lots of new ideas are coming across. So I think young students love to have those great debates and arguments and heated arguments. As we mature a little bit, we're less likely to want to engage in those type of debates.
For me, it gets, my politics and just reason-based thinking all come together, so it can very easily go from talking about religion and taking a logic-based approach to life to global warming. and then if you see that there's a coalescence that the religious not wanting to look at something carefully lets them not look at global warming carefully, or extreme capitalism where 1% gets all the money, so those two conversations meld very quickly. And I guess that sort of leads me into those debates, which again, I haven't figured out a good way to do while maintaining friendships.
I think it's always going to be difficult. And I think it's not just religion, it can be politics. It could be a lot of different things that as humans are very social, and we tiptoe a lot around these social situations. But that's with friends and colleagues. The issue of having your family completely disown you is so much more difficult and harsh, to not be able to have those conversations with the people who mean the most to you, with the people who you really want to love you for who you are. So many people are stuck in this situation where they don't tell their families because they are fearful that they will be ostracized. And I can't blame them. I don't know if I would have been able to have been an out atheist had I known that I would have lost all the love of my family. As it was, I didn't from my parents and my sister. My sister's an atheist anyway, but I don't know if I would have had the courage to be an outed atheist. And so when I hear about these young people and older people too who go through these problems and their families completely disconnect from them, my heart just goes out to them. And I don't understand how families can do that. I don't understand how a parent can stop loving their child, or just because that child no longer believes in the same thing that they do. And it's heart-rending. And it's not just young people, it's people of all ages that struggle with this.
You had talked about one very specific group that has unique problems with the clergy, and maybe we can talk about that a little bit, that these people that have been, couldn't be more heartfelt involved in religion for many, many years, and then have an awakening where they either see enough stuff in their, primary text that they no longer can sanction, or something happens and they decide that this is not the way the world works. And what do those people go through?
Oh gosh, this is Linda Lascola, who is here in DC. She did some research. She did research with Dan Dennett, but she headed the research in contacting people who were members of the clergy, and not just Christians, but Jews and Muslims, who no longer believed. She sent out, she would put ads in different religious magazines and things, and asked people to contact her if they were having doubt, and told them that it was a study. And she did these very long interviews for months, sometimes, with some of these men and women who had lost their belief in the supernatural, but were still playing in the role of clergy. What ended up happening after the study was done, some of these men and women who had been talking to her for months were, well, now what? All of this has been opened up. I've now opened up to someone because they have no one to talk to when you think about it. They can't go to anyone in their community. They can't often talk to their spouse about it because their spouse is very religious. They're fearful of losing their families. They're fearful of losing their friends. Often in small communities, everyone knows who they are, so you can't just trot down to the nearest therapist and talk to him or her. So after some discussion, the Richard Dawkins Foundation decided to step up to the plate, and we created a website, a very, very secure website, where these men and women could meet one another anonymously through the website and talk. Just simply talk to one another and help one another through their various struggles. We also invited ex-clergy who had already come out but had gone through these same problems. So they had the experience of what it was like. Some of them had lost their families. Some of these stories could bring tears to your eyes.
But I'd mentioned we had our, we're not very religious, but when we had first, moved down to Virginia, we had somebody in the family who was very sick, and we had a rabbi down there that was incredibly kind to our family and the family members, and they stayed with us. And we really felt very affected, even though I wasn't particularly religious back then. And then years later, found out that he had disowned his son because he married a non-Jew. And again, it's just the heartbreaking thing of what religion could get such a nice person to do such a terrible thing and not see it.
And not see how harmful it was. So some of these people had lost their families. The ex-clergy had lost their families. And so we just got these people together to talk. And we kept this project called the Clergy Project secret. We didn't want the media to know. We didn't want there to be any breach of security. We wanted to make sure that anyone who joined, they went through a very intense screening. They were personally contacted, and after a while they could be brought in and join the group. After nearly a year of this organization existing in sort of a secret way, the members themselves decided that they thought it was a good idea to let the public know that this project existed, because we couldn't reach, of course, everyone who's out there who have lost their faith, who are in this particularly unique circumstances, because it isn't just losing your family. You're losing everything. You're losing your income, your insurance, you're losing your social standing in the community, you're losing what you probably dedicated 30, 40, 50 years of your life doing.
Right, that sounds like that's been your entire life, and that's what you associate yourself with,
right.
And to step away from it, the very core values that you've embraced.
And you talked about the difficulty of leaving the medical field after, I mean, not,
brief time.
You're still a young, you're still young enough that we're not talking about you've spent 40 years in the medical community. So here are these people, everything about them and would go away. They felt hypocritical because they were standing up in the pulpit preaching what they didn't believe. Many of them said, the few that I did speak to said they sort of changed the wording of how they normally would preach. But
that's got to be a very fine hair to split to figure out a way to do that. A very fine
hair to split. And so what ended up happening is several members of the Clergy Project came out very publicly around the same time. And of course, the news media went nuts, right? And oh my gosh, there's people, I can't believe there's people who are in the clergy who are now no longer believe. And the people that came out, they went through a lot of different grief, but also, for the most part, great joy. They felt so relieved. They felt so happy. And I won't tell all the stories, because at one point I really do hope that we can bring some of these people on. And some of their stories are in the media and can be looked up. And they're just beautiful stories.
Well, these really sound like true heroes, because they took such personal risk and at such personal cost, weren't hypocrites, right? They did what had to be one of the hardest things in the world to do, and I'm sure that they get smeared and painted by.
Oh yeah, some of the things that were said about them were pretty cruel. In fact, even many atheists said some very unkind things for those people who were still part of the Clergy Project, who were not willing to come out, telling them that they were hypocrites and how could I feel sorry for them? They're without any human understanding of the situation.
Yeah, I think we always have to keep that in mind, that there are real costs associated with admitting that you're gay or admitting that you're an atheist or whatever it is, that you suffer those costs, your family does, your loved ones do, and it's always very complicated what you should do. I think scientists maybe are in a better position. Like, our society would be very different if we suddenly had what 90+% of scientists, bench researchers and hard scientists don't believe in God.
Right.
What if all these people came out at once, which is the whole idea, I guess, of coming out together, and everybody had to just see, wait a second, all these professors in biology, none of them believe in these, outdated sacred texts, and all of our professors, all of our teachers, it would just make it so much easier for everybody else.
And not just scientists, but there are a lot of famous people who have nothing to do with science, who are atheists.
Theologians are maybe better positioned than anybody else to see all
anybody else to say right, and there's actors and actresses and who have clearly stated that they're atheists, and so those people are important again for role models but also just for everyday people to be able to come out.
I think for when Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, who everybody loves, come out, it's probably harder to demonize them once you've loved them for 10 years. And then you see the wonderful things they do. And Brad Pitt, I think, acknowledged, I could never run for office even though people want me to, because I've admitted I'm an atheist. And how sad is that you have such a popular humanitarian that can't run for office because of that.
Bill Gates and others who are non-believers.
And Bill Gates, I meant to talk about during our anti-vaccine show that Bill Gates with his foundation has just done probably more than any other individual human being in history to try to combat the anti-vaccination group and to get stuff out there for millions of people.
Yeah, so there are incredibly good people who are atheists. I mean, Mark Twain was an atheist, and I believe Dr. Seuss was an atheist, and there are lots of good people who are atheists that, or who were atheists, they're dead now, but who we can look at and use as role models.
I've been listening to some Robert Ingersoll lately, and the things he said 100 years ago or 150 years ago, it's amazing how pertinent they still are.
Still makes sense. And I do want to mention one more thing with the Clergy Project. After these very brave men and women came out in a very open way, we had also created a public website that explained the Clergy Project and had information about some of those who had come out and some of their stories, and a way for other people in the same situation to join in this Clergy Project and to go through the screenings. It's a very long process, and not everyone who applies is accepted. It's pretty interesting, but
Well, we'll probably have to catch up on that later. Thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you next time on Road to Reason.